Thank you for that really comprehensive introduction, Carl, that I've known for a decade. Rude. Okay, yes, I'm Kat, and we're going to talk about variety. Yes? That's what you all signed up for? Wonderful. All right. Who has heard any of these words? Probably uttered by someone in a well-tailored blue suit. Yes? You're going to platform play, your service pivot, to utilize network effects. Super rad, right? That's what millennials say, Carl. Yeah. All right. But this really it's probably a good indicator that we are going through some sort of change, right? That's usually, those kinds of people are trying to sell you some change that's happening in the market. And I think there are good examples of these things, and we're all probably familiar with Facebook, right? They don't create content, you create the content, right? And they're connecting people to this content. Uber, great example, or whatever, ride sharing, right? Yeah, creating those connections. The top one is probably my favorite. That's the grocery store that I go to back home. Yeah, so what they did was they created an app, right? And they actually brought people into all of the grocery stores to teach old people how to use the app. Yeah, that's an interesting investment of their time, but that's because they're trying to shift from a purely the historical model that we've had for grocery stores where it's purely transactional to a model that is based on forming a relationship with the people who are in the grocery store. And there's multiple reasons for that. One, you're locking people in, right? If you have the app and you're giving them discounts and you're saying, are you out of milk? Do you need that? Do you want to place an order ahead of time and pick it up? You're locking them into your grocery store. You're also able to gather a lot of data about what people actually want, right? So instead of having a collection of transactions, you're having a relationship with a customer. And that's a brand new thing, yes? That's surely never happened before, and it's a huge change sweeping our whole industry. Does anyone disagree with that statement? A couple brave souls disagree with that statement. So I am from Phoenix, Arizona, the wild, wild west, right? We all walk around and have spurs on our boots and all of these things, right? We love to act like that's not true, but it actually is more true than you might suspect. This is the saloon that my grandparents owned for a long time in a little mining town in the mountains outside of Phoenix, because it's surrounded by mountains. What is the model at this saloon? Purely transactional, right? Of course not. It's a town with 50 people, right? Like, you have to form relationships with people in this model, right? And that's a natural thing because you don't think, wow, in this town that has a one-room schoolhouse, I have a wide variety of saloon options from which to choose, and I like to spread my business around. No, there is one saloon in this town. And you don't form really a relationship with the saloon. Like I said, that's the grocery store that I go to, but you wouldn't say that in Crown King, Arizona. You would say, I go to Bob and Pat's saloon. You, a human, have a relationship with other humans, and that has been the way that people have done business for a very long time. So what I think is that technology is just kind of catching up to that model of conducting business. Yeah? Yeah. And we're kind of removing one of the constraints because in this model, what's the constraint that I just kept talking about? Physical proximity, right? If you live at the top of a mountain with 2 roads in and out of town, you form a relationship with these saloon proprietors because it's the only one there, and what are you really going to do? Like, drive whatever, 100 miles to the next town over, which is Horse Thief Basin. So very, very reputable town, let me just tell you. No, you probably just stay here, right? So the physical proximity is a constraint there. But now we are shifting to business models that are all about relationships with customers and not necessarily being constrained by physical proximity. Does anyone disagree with that? Where were my naysayers before? I can't remember. All right, so it's basically this, yes? And if you're ever in Crown King, Arizona, which you will never be, drop on by. So how did we get here? And where do we go next? I believe it starts with this. Is anyone familiar with this phrase? Economies of scale. We hear about that all the time, don't we? Yes. But I bet that you are familiar with this economies of scale, supply side economies of scale. Yeah, so that's when you make a bunch of something and the unit cost for each one of those somethings goes down as you make more and more and more. That's the economies of scale that we are familiar with generally, right? Yeah, we've all heard of this at some point. So what are we driving towards economies of scale right now? No one remembers Simon's talk yesterday at all? Instantly forgettable, that's how I sum him up, right? No, we're pushing compute, right, farther and farther down into this economies of scale. So we want to make it really cheap to spin up an instance if we're even doing that, and really cheap to tear it down, right? Yeah, and with, as we get more and more and aggregate more and more, then each becomes cheaper. What about this one? This is interesting, isn't it? Demand economies of scale. This is something that now people are starting to buzz about. So instead of trying to minimize unit costs, we're now trying to maximize the value of a network. And I brought up ride sharing before, but I think this is a really good example. On the big ride sharing platforms, they will, when there are too many riders and not enough drivers, they'll offer additional incentive to the drivers, right, to draw them in, because they're trying to maximize the value of the network rather than trying to save cost on individual drivers, right? Yeah. And same thing when there's not enough riders and they're trying to keep drivers engaged in the network, they'll offer some sort of discount, right? 20% off your next 5 rides or something like that, right? So a little bit different there. But what you're trying to drive is engagement, right? Trying to drive engagement. Has anyone read this book before? This is kind of like the summary of those things. It's making the rounds. I'm sure a copy will land on your desk, or you will be the person landing a copy on someone else's desk. But this is the thing, right? And it cites all these luminaries and thought leaders and whatever the case may be. But now we have the technology to do this, right? Because we are able to push compute and some other things more towards commodity, we now can build this infrastructure for maintaining relationships with customers. So now technology is catching up to the way that we would just like to conduct business anyway. Does anyone disagree with that point? Does anyone agree with that point? Does anyone need a cup of coffee? Anyone have any feelings at all? Wonderful. And I will give 1,000 gold stars to anyone who gets this joke on the far left about, it is a data grid, my friend. Ho-ho! All right, I'm sorry I had to do that to you at this hour of the morning. But basically, we have this technical infrastructure now that can support those relationships with customers, right? You initially engage with the platform doesn't know what you want, but then it learns your preferences over time, right? And able to actually start shaping your preferences and shaping your engagement. Yeah? There's a couple of people that are like, no, if you disagree with this premise, you're going to have a real hard time with the rest of the talk. But basically, we are enabling variety, because each one of us is a beautiful, unique human being, right? So we are enabling the fulfillment of individual needs through the standardization of other parts of our technical ecosystem. So we're now able to support the variety of the market through standardization in other parts of our ecosystem. That's okay. We all wrap our heads around that, right? Yeah, many of us are engaged in this transition already. So we're making this shift from purely transactional to more of an ecosystem model, more of a relationship-based model. And so it's really a return to the relationships, but without the constraint of the physical proximity. And there's other weird things happening with, I thought I brought my phone up, but I didn't, but with the physical nature of things. I have a Kindle up there. Does anyone in this room have a device? Carl's probably not familiar with it, but a smartphone? Did anyone have one of those? Okay, wonderful. Oh, Lucy, you've heard of that? Great, terrific. Okay, so does anyone remember, and this is a sort of young crowd, but I'm young too, you'll remember, right? It used to be you got a phone and you spent how much time? Like, oh, I got to copy numbers over, or I got to put I have to reinstall all my apps and all of this stuff, right? Yeah. Do you do that now? No, you have a persistent relationship with Apple or with Google or whatever the case may be, and you can get new phones all the time, right? It's every year around this time when the new phones come out, and we can just keep buying them, and it's effortless to install yourself on that physical object, right? Yeah. So now you have a relationship, again, with Google or with Apple and not with that physical object. So again, kind of separating the relationship from the physicalness of the relationship. I don't know why I'm using this as an example. It's quite obviously not smart. Anyway, yeah, so we get to these. This is another way that we can describe this interesting shift. Right? It used to be for me to get something that would meet my specific needs. We have companies that are doing this mass customization where I order the shoes that look the specific way that I want them to look, right? Like custom Nikes or custom Converse or whatever. Yeah, something like that, where it's customized for everyone, but the firm that is supplying that is doing the customization based on what you tell them. Now, who does the customization to your phone? You do. You do it for free. You used to have to pay those people to customize the stuff, and now you're doing it for free for them, right? Yeah. So that would be late customization, and there's lots of things like this. Why don't phones have keyboards? They have like no physical buttons, right? Because that's something that you would have to keep updating. It further constrains where you could send that phone, right? Whereas if you have basically a blank slate, you can have a keyboard for whatever language you can have, right? So by shifting that customization to you, all of you, right? We again get this really interesting shift. So that's late customization. I'm going to go through a lot of ways of describing this shift because I really want it to stick with you. Are you picking up on that right now? Wonderful. I think one or two of you are starting to pick up on this. Does anyone know Mel Conway, the work of Mel Conway? I think I have Conway's Law in here. Wow, someone whistled. Okay, we'll have to tell Conway that. But this is Conway's Law. So if you're not familiar with it, this is like the thing that made Conway famous, but he has done wonderful work through his whole life, and you should definitely check out his stuff. But anyway, it says that systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of the organization. And we see this all the time in our work, right? But that's not actually what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about this. So this is Conway's way of describing some of the same shifts. So he says, and he's old enough to remember, that you started off with a pre-software industry economy. So we're talking about tech right now. So basically this was, I buy a piece of hardware and I have programmers who program it to do whatever I, in the firm that's doing the purchasing, need to do. Yes? Or I buy a piece of hardware that is programmed to do the one thing, and that's kind of what it does. And then we go to a software economy where we have people who write software, yeah? And that's kind of separate from the actual physical device, right? So you can buy a physical device and then you can also buy software, regardless of whether or not you have programmers that are sitting there with that device. And now what we're seeing is this emergence of no-code or low-code applications. So has anyone here worked with any sort of like reporting something, right? Where basically what happens is we make data available and we have a reporting platform, and then users are able to interact with that reporting platform in a no-code or a low-code way in order to create a report or a dashboard that meets their specific need, right? So before, what was reporting? It was that you made a request of developers to create this report, and that's kind of just what it is. And you would have to make another request in order to change that report. And now, again, pushing that work out to the users, and they are creating reports or dashboards. Yes? So it's, again, just the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. Kind of feels like it's a thing, huh? Yeah, but we're pushing out, we're just building these big channels that are big enough in order to support the fulfillment of a diverse set of needs. Yeah, all right. So again, we have huge variety that is enabled by standardization. Right on. So we're going from transactions to relationships. So that model of I put in a request for whatever report and someone gives me the report and I use it for a while and decide it's not what I need and I put in another request, that's a much more transactional model. Okay. So business is going through a fundamental change, and I'm not just raising my voice at the end because I'm a millennial, but it appears that there's something happening at the same time. What is happening? There's a little clue on this slide. We've all heard these scary little snippets. 50% of the S&P 500 will be replaced over the next 10 years. Half of all companies that began trading in any given year have disappeared in 10.5 years. So it seems that the fundamental change is that companies are dying more quickly, that lifespan is going down. I don't know. Does that seem legit to you? Why do things die? That's not a rhetorical question. Because they're old? In a manner of speaking, right? So it seems like as we go through life, things happen, right? And things happen to us. We accumulate kind of all of this sort of debt within our bodies, and we have to maintain ourselves, and we spend more and more of our energy maintaining ourselves. And then a tiny perturbation can push an organism over the edge, right? And they don't have the additional capacity in order to absorb that variability, right? So much of the total energy of the organism is put into maintenance that it's unable to kind of absorb whatever that perturbation is from the outside world. And this is from a book called Scale. And I know some people in this room just hate the Santa Fe Institute, but it's an interesting book. It's an interesting perspective. And you know what? Gosh darn it, I think you should read it. There's also this, which is also about absorbing those things from the outside world, or that's what I think it is. So this is Ashbeys Law of Requisite Variety. A lot of cybernetics fans in the room, right? Oh yeah. Okay, the larger variety of actions available to a system, the larger variety of the perturbations it is able to compensate. So if you have this total bucket of energy, right? And if you're sinking a bunch of it into maintenance, how much do you have available for actions that would compensate for that variability? Ooh, not a whole lot, right? Is anyone familiar with these key phrases? Anyone in this room specifically familiar with these key phrases? I'm hoping that you're familiar because they are part of the principles of the Agile Manifesto. So if you're not familiar, I highly recommend reading that. What is this? What is this saying? I think what the Agile Manifesto, or as I like to call it, the Dad Jeans Manifesto, I think what it's driving at is saying that we should try to increase our ability to metabolize new information from the market, right? We want to it's all about obtaining feedback, obtaining information more quickly, being able to react, right? As things change in the market, we want to be able to absorb that. What happens to working software? It's working software. Working software. It works forever perfectly, does it not? Of course, that's been my experience. No, what is working software? It's basically we are incurring a maintenance obligation. So Agile is telling us we need to metabolize information more quickly. We do that by creating working software and everything's good to go. Well, luckily we had Agile, the rise of Agile, and then what have we had since then? The rise of DevOps. Yes. I think, and I don't know, I'm purely making this up, but I have the stage, so I feel entitled to do that. I think that DevOps is a reaction to that. We went fully in the direction of metabolism, and I think DevOps is the desire to balance that with an attention to maintenance. Yes? And finding the right ratio between that. So we said with Agile that we want to be able to absorb the variability of the market, and now we're building this technical infrastructure for us to do that. And I think DevOps is asking, where can we decrease our investment in maintenance, right? So are there things that we can automate so that we get more of our total energy back for metabolizing changes within the market, right? And are there things that we can push towards commodity so that we can gain more of our energy for absorbing that variability? And DevOps does what? Encourages dev and ops to actually negotiate that ratio, right? Rather than everyone just with their blinders on, right? But it encourages us to think about homeostasis rather than I'm here to maximize metabolism and I'm here to minimize maintenance, right? And we negotiate that and find the right ratio. So what we are driving at here is that we would like to metabolize more information and not die doing it, which seems like an overall good strategy, no? Yeah. So I talked a little bit about maintenance, some of the things, but this is something that is near and dear to my heart, so again, I have the cool aerobics instructor mic right now, so I'll talk about what I want to talk about. So let's talk about maintenance. What are the things that we can do to minimize our investment in maintenance? I think there are a lot of things, but I want to call out some specifically. So in my team, how many of you have ever been measured by lines of code? How many lines of code you write? Yeah. Yes. That seems absurd now, does it not? Yeah, I had someone submit a report to me that had their lines of code written on it. I'm like, whoa, I think I'm allergic to that. Yeah, so in my team, what we have is actually a little bit of an incentive, just like a little stupid thing that we'll do for people if they delete the most lines of code. So I manage a platform that is 43 years old. There's a lot of lines of code. And so we provide a small incentive for people to delete lines of code instead of write more lines. Standardize more stuff. We talked about that, right? So we're not trying to prematurely standardize things, but things that are arriving at a pattern, and if we standardize them, it would, again, unlock capacity elsewhere. What doesn't make sense to standardize, keeping in mind, though, that what we standardize kind of has a tendency to become ossified. Kill things. We're so bad at this as an industry, right? And I think it's for multiple reasons, but I lovingly birthed this application into the world, and it's my baby. Do I want to kill it? No, probably not, right? But I think we should. I think it's disrespectful, actually, for us to just continue to birth things and not think of how they can gracefully cease to exist. For me, that is extremely disrespectful, and it's something we'll have to get better at as an industry, or else we will perish, right? There is the option to never even write the code. Some things just shouldn't be written. You should buy the thing, right, off the shelf, or you should just not even do the thing. So there's a whole no code movement kind of right now. And then ephemeral innovation is the last one, and I think it's a little bit of a wacky one, but I would love it if we could start thinking about this more as an industry. Is it possible to just very temporarily incur some differentiation that will die whenever that promise is fulfilled, right? And so yesterday everyone laughed at Bitcoin, right? Yeah, that's one of my favorite pastimes too, laughing at Bitcoin. But I don't think that cryptocurrency is actually the value there provided by blockchain and smart contracts and those types of things. I think it's actually this opportunity for ephemeral innovation, right? Or ephemeral differentiation, where we specify differentiation in a contract and then it's done and we no longer maintain it when the contract has expired or is fulfilled. So let that sit with you for a minute. I don't have any Bitcoin jokes today, sorry. So what we're trying to do here is achieve a desirable ratio between metabolism and maintenance. And like I said, there's this danger if we try to prematurely decrease our maintenance costs, so we're trying to negotiate a good ratio there because we want to increase the actions available to our system, right? So the market suddenly changes. We want to have capacity to do things that will fulfill the emerging needs and absorb that change. But what actions are actually available to a system? Because I could provide lots of capacity for metabolism and still not have people that are able to see the things that we need to do, right? And yesterday we talked actually a lot about this, sensitizing ourselves to potential paths forward, to a variety of potential actions. Did we not? Was everyone here yesterday? Is everyone here now? Okay, interesting. There were tons. We actually had this thread all through the day, and props to, I guess, you and the crew for creating a schedule that was very coherent. But we had this theme throughout the day of increasing our sensitivity to available actions by first taking an account of the situation. What is the actual evidence out there, right? And then trying to account for the situation. So don't just jump to accounting for, because that could blind you to some potential options in your option set. Remember? Yeah, that was fun. So Catherine talked about this, that if we immediately jump to the accounting for a situation, we won't be able to see all of the potential things we could do. We develop like this blindness, and that is undesirable because it decreases our optionality, so we could have capacity for exploring those options and just purely not be able to see them. So it's not enough just to achieve that ratio between maintenance and metabolism. I think what we talked about a lot yesterday was earning your own trust. And I know that is kind of weird, right? Because you should trust yourself, but do you always? No. And welcome, Chris McDermott. Nice of you to join us. A bit late. All right, so earning your own trust. And earn is the key word there, right? Because what Catherine talked about is where we just have this like righteous anger. We're like, I'm right, right? But we were provided yesterday with a lot of tools for earning your own trust. Evaluating your environment, checking yourself, right? And developing these tools to examine these assumptions that you have and earning your own trust. So I think that is really important. If we want to increase our option set, then we have to earn our own trust by carefully stepping through how we arrived at those assumptions. This is my mom and my son. We talked about that yesterday too, right? That we have to surface and exploit difference. So Dave talked to us about the fact that like these kids could dream up really cool things that would never happen, right? And the grandparents were like, look, I have a lot of experience in making things happen, and it's good when you combine that. It's good when you surface those differences, and instead of saying, no, let's all act the same, right? We mindfully say, this is a good combination of difference. And there are companies that are out there right now that everyone in this room will have heard of, who they are doing this intentionally right now, right? So there are very large companies who consider this a risk mitigation strategy. So they have whatever, they're like tracking the backgrounds of people, which I don't know how I really feel about, but they are doing it, right? And they're saying it for this profile of project or this profile of product or whatever the case may be, we think we need to combine these different sets of experience, because otherwise we'll have people who are blind to really important things within that space, right? So unfortunately, just making some personas on the wall, probably not going to do enough. You actually have to go out and find different people, bring them together in a group, and what did we hear yesterday in Gita's session? You have to make it a space where they can actually come there and say, this is my different opinion, right? Because you could assemble a bunch of different people and then tell them, please all act the same. So we have to surface and exploit difference. And this, I hope, maybe can be a theme for today. So we have to be sensitive to these signals in the market, and we have to create sensitivity in people, right? So there is a tendency towards blindness. Does anyone have any of these? One or two people? Come on. Yeah. So I think that we are using these tools completely incorrectly, and I think there are at least a few people in the audience who would agree with me. Is everyone in this room a mammal? Okay, wonderful. How long is the lifespan of a mammal? All mammals. It's 1 billion heartbeats. So a mammal whose heart beats really fast will have a shorter lifespan. A mammal whose heart beats really slowly will have a longer lifespan. Yeah. So a big animal whose heart beats slowly will have a longer lifespan. What is the advice about OKRs or strategic intents or whatever the case may be? Refresh it every year. Or the wacky people say, refresh it every 18 months. Let's just start at the top and then it trickles down from there. I think that is stupid. If we think of an organization as having this circulatory system for information, then if you have a really large organization and you're changing your strategic intent or your very top level OKRs every quarter, right? Because if once a year is good, then every quarter is way better. All you're doing is causing frenetic switching at the lowest levels of that, right? So the organization is constantly in catch-up mode instead of actually doing what they should be, which is metabolizing new information, sending that information back up to the beating heart, right? And we can look across longer time spans and see if a pivot is recommended. So we have built this infrastructure, and now we apply the same OKRs across the whole thing, right? Yes. The same, everyone has we have a chant that we all do when we encounter each other, which is like a simplified version of the OKR. No, if you are working on something where you're trying to drive standardization, right, in service of that OKR, probably what you should be looking at is things around this, minimizing the unit cost of whatever you're trying to standardize. And if you're working on building that space, that channel that can pass information that is the differentiation in the market, then you should be looking at things about how to maximize the value of that network. So those If you have one OKR that is about relationships or whatever the case may be, you should customize it to what would actually serve that within your part of the organization, as opposed to having these metrics that just apply universally across all teams, right? I'm sure there are several people in this room that have horror stories about that. So I think that OKRs and goals and those things should be developing this sensitivity. So a sensitivity to what I should be doing in order to meet our goal, right? And creating a sensitivity to these types of things. How many of you have ever been in a situation where you go to a new team or something like that, and they're doing something in a weird way, and you say, why do you do it that way? And they say, well, we've always done it that way. Why have you always done it that way? It's a rule. How many of you have investigated that further and found it's not a rule at all? It is purely a routine that has ossified to the point where people just do not violate that. So what if we used OKRs and goals and strategic intents to sensitize people to the things that they take for granted as being true about their environment that are simply not true and not suited for the current environment? Right? So instead of saying like, this is your goal and we're headed here, say, you don't have to do that anymore. How would that unlock a different set of options? And same thing, explicitly giving people freedom and explicitly calling out constraints. You're sensitizing people to things in their environment that they may just take for granted. And that's what we heard over and over and over again yesterday, right? That the most dangerous thing is when people just take what they know for granted, right? And then what in our OKRs, in our goals, what indicators can we give to people so that they can get a sense earlier of whether they're headed in the right direction, right? Or if they're perceiving new information that might invalidate that direction, or might say that we're not going to get where we thought we were going to get, right? So instead of saying, this is what you must achieve, what if we said, here are some things that we would like you to be looking out for? And this becomes more and more important the less certain we are about certain outcomes. No one knows who said this quote, so I'm attributing it to someone that I like. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. So the things that we take for granted as being 100% true about our world, that have either they were true, but they've changed, they were never true, that we developed these false perceptions. What if we used our OKRs and our strategies and these things to sensitize people to the things that they know that just ain't so? Yeah? And there was an interesting undercurrent yesterday about this, and I think how do we know what is so or not so, right? It's a very weird place to be. I don't know if anyone saw this on Twitter, if y'all are on Twitter, but I recently joined a superhero league. Yeah, the Epistemic Justice League. I don't know, I guess I need like a cape or something. I'm working on it. It's my first time as a superhero. Does anyone remember this little tidbit that was dropped yesterday about the gorilla? And there's multiple, I don't know why gorillas are a thing, but there's multiple gorilla experiments, right? There's the gorilla video, there's the gorilla x-rays or whatever. Gorillas, I don't know what it is. It's very interesting. But basically, in these experiments, what happens is there is a gorilla, they put their eyes on that, they receive that input, and they are unable to say there was a gorilla. And then the even more messed up thing is the people that are like, bro, did you see that gorilla? They can be convinced that they didn't see the gorilla that was 100% actually there. So you, because you are so certain about the world that gorillas don't show up in lungs or in some corporate ball-throwing thing, that you will say to that person, oh, please, come on. A gorilla, maybe he was just a really hairy guy. Right? But you say things like this. This phrase is the one that I hate. I hear it and I have a physical reaction to it. That's unbelievable. Well, believe it, right? I think it is our duty to hear what people are saying, and before we say that's unbelievable because it doesn't fit in my specific worldview, we can just take a moment to say, wow, what if there was a gorilla? That would be probably something we should investigate. Is it really that horrible for you to say, what if there was a gorilla? Is that really going to inconvenience you so much that you can't even think about that possibility? There's a huge potential upside here that that person could be sensitized to see something that you are blind to, and there's very little downside. Like, what is the downside of you saying, wow, what if there was a gorilla? What is the downside there? There isn't one. So next time someone says, I saw a gorilla, you'd be like, oh, what kind? And if you are interested in learning more about this, there's this emerging field of study around epistemic injustice, so the sad part of that, right, where we convince people that they don't know the things they know. This is something Americans love. We love gaslighting each other. We're truly fantastic at it. But I think the worst space we could get to is where people don't even bother saying that they saw a gorilla because they don't trust themselves and they don't trust you to hear them. And we've seen examples of this, right? And this is where technology can go very wrong. If people speak up and we don't listen to them, or if we make people feel so shitty that they stop even speaking up. Anyone familiar with these examples? Anyone know Tay? Any woman who has been on the internet for any length of time would tell you that putting Tay, the chatbot, on Twitter would be a very bad idea, right? I can show you some of the wonderful messages that I receive, right? So Tay, chatbot, becomes radicalized on Twitter, being trained by those types of interactions. And there's other horrible examples I won't even go into now, but how much money would these companies have saved if they had just listened to the people who were telling them that is a terrible idea, right? Does anyone remember when Amazon arrived at this algorithm that like only hired people named Steve who played lacrosse? Yeah, I know in my circle of friends there were tons of people who long before it arrived at that were saying, that's a terrible idea. You save a lot of money by just listening to people say, that's a terrible idea. What is the downside of that? Like you might feel bad for a second? Oh, okay. So if we want to increase the variety of actions that are available to our system so that we can continue to exist in the world, even though it's a company, it doesn't actually exist at all, but that's something for another day. We now have the technical capability to do this, right? We can build these large channels that can pass enough data that we can fulfill the individual needs of consumers. And we're just getting better at this, right? We've just arrived here and we're only going to get better at that. But it's not enough. Just because we are technically capable of doing those things does not mean that we will be able to exist in the world, right? Successfully. And it could be that we exist in the world successfully, and success means that the business persists, but we like annihilate all of humanity or something cheery like that. So if we want a variety of actions available to us, we need a variety of people from a variety of circumstances with a variety of socialization, and we need them to be able to speak up. So we have to, if you are in a position of power, you must train yourself at hearing those things and not jumping to, that's unbelievable, right? But saying, what if there was a gorilla? And then, if you want to take that one step further, you don't just want to absorb whatever the market throws at you and be kind of in this reactionary stance. You could be proactive, and there are companies out there right now who are doing this, that are consciously seeking out people that are marginalized or underserved by the current paradigm, and they're hiring those people. Because who can tell them all the ways in which they're not serving people, the ones that they're not serving. So I've been into so many companies. I used to be a consultant, and also I'm 31, so I've just applied at a lot of companies before too. And my favorite is when the company's like, you don't use our product? No, because your product wasn't made for me. So no, I don't use it. Do you want to talk to me about why, or are you just going to try to force it upon me? So if you are interested in how you might be disrupted, you should seek out the people who are underserved by the current paradigm, right? So there is the chance that they could be the next wave of people, like millennials, Carl. I have no concept of how much time I have left. I could stop here. I could talk about one more depressing thing. Wonderful. Carl gave me the go-ahead to talk about one more depressing thing. Okay. So if organizations are constrained to kind of just implement the communication structures that exist, right? Build that into our product. Is the same thing possibly true about the way that we think? So if we, in the course of creating these products, have a tendency to just go with our assumptions, jump to conclusions, all of these things, do you think that we're probably creating products that encourage users to do the same thing? Probably, right? And that's the danger with, I think, yes, that's the danger now, because we have this capability to now drive engagement. That's what we're oftentimes optimizing for, driving engagement. Engage, 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 engage. And is that thoughtful engagement? No, I didn't say anything about thoughtful. I just said engage. And so if we are jumping to conclusions, we are just working with our assumptions, there's a good chance our users will as well. And I can't speak to your situation here, but I know in the States that doesn't seem to be working out very well for us. It seems like if there was a moment to think about whatever news you're sharing or whatever thing you're posting, right, and examine the world and earn your own trust. If we were doing that, it seems like we could engage with each other in a healthier way. And I think that's part of the danger of removing that constraint of physical proximity. And why is this important to do now? How do you measure the age of a baby? In years? This baby is 0 years old. It continues to be 0 years old. Tomorrow will be 0 years old. No. You use weeks probably at the beginning, right? Yeah. And then you move to months eventually. Has anyone ever been sitting in a room and you're like, we got to get rid of this legacy software? And someone goes, yeah, can't believe it was written in 2014. If we are measuring the way that we are progressing in these very short time spans, what do you think that's telling us about how old our industry is in the grand scheme of things? We're babies. And even if we're not babies, maybe you could just entertain the possibility that we are, and our industry is not mature, and we're kind of just at the start of something. If we're just at the start of something, well, let's put it this way. Who in your company are you overall hiring? So whether you're hiring in your team or not, but overall in your company, you're hiring for technology positions. How many of you have ever participated in some big technology recruitment woohoo type thing? Yeah, I bet some of you are here right now participating in that manner, right? So would you say that our industry is growing or shrinking? Oh, it seems like it's growing. So what does that mean? It means that this is as small as our industry is going to be for a long time. It will get bigger. So when there are more people, we can split the responsibility across all of those people. Now there are fewer people, so what does that mean? You have a huge amount of responsibility to shape the way that our industry is going, because there's relatively very few people involved in this industry right now. So whether you want to take responsibility for that or not, you have the responsibility. You will have a great amount of impact relative to your peers in the future, just by math, because there are fewer of us right now, right? We're seeing this, right? Yeah. So we're babies. How long did the agricultural revolution take? 3 days? I assume that's what you were indicating, right? Oh, hundreds of years. Interesting. Oh, okay. So the decades that we've been in this is probably small, and we're probably not there yet. When I say this, people love to come at me with the Industrial Revolution, so this used to just be a slide of grain, but now I've added the Industrial Revolution. Who wants to talk to me about that? How long was the Industrial Revolution? Come on. I know some of you are like, it was only decades. Come on, you can say that to me. Sure, go for it. Oh, thank you, Chris. You're wrong. This is not a safe space. You're definitely wrong. No. Much of the world is still industrializing. So just because we have been industrialized here, does that mean that there's still a bunch of industrial crap going on here, right? Where was your clothing made? Here? Right here? Likely not, right? So industrial activities are still happening, even though you don't see them. They're happening elsewhere in the world, and the world is still going through this process of industrialization. Right? What's happening in Africa right now? Huge movement towards industrialization. And who's doing that? Well, the last group to go through that, now they've gone over there and they're shepherding. So yes, each wave of industrialization is shorter than the last one, but the world is still industrializing. So now we're in these overlapping paradigms, and I just don't want any of you to think that we have matured and we're past all these growing pains, and now I just need to do everything the way that the industry tells me I need to do it. No, we're still sorting this out, and each one of us has this incredible responsibility. And I hope that you are mindful of that when you go back to work. Yes? Okay, that's all.